I just want to thank you to the panelists for joining us and to everyone at home who's tuning in as well. We have what's sure to be an incredible night ahead. I've been really looking forward to this. We have a really critical discussion today with our esteemed guests, Jean Saint-Vil, Al Jones, and Jemima Pierre. I'm wondering if people at home are able to use the chat right now. We'd love to hear from you. Attendees can chat. Oh, great, great. I can see folks at home. Hi, Leanne. Hi, Honor. So again, we're joined by Jean Saint-Vil, Al Jones, Jemima Pierre, and I'm here with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. We want to offer our thanks to our co-sponsoring events, co-sponsoring organizations rather, Common Frontiers, as well as our media sponsor, Canadian Dimension. And I'll be posting the links to these organizations in the chat. Please do find out about the terrific work that these organizations are doing. Before I begin this evening, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the island of Montreal, or Jojage, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people. We're the keepers of the eastern door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And it's a place that has long been a point of meeting and of exchange amongst many First Nations. So it's wonderful to see you all here for this, this critical discussion. As I mentioned, the chat is open. Please do say hi, let us know where you're tuning in from. We love to hear from you at home. Just as always, please keep your comments civil and free from racist, sexist, or otherwise harmful commentary. Hello, the folks at home. Hi, Joanna. Hi, Judy. Hi, Chris. Hi, Francis. Hi, Tella. Wonderful, wonderful to have you all here with us. So after our speakers give their opening remarks, we'll be opening up to questions from the audience. So please do post your questions in the Q&A box. If anyone has any trouble finding that, just let us know in the chat. And we'll get to as many as we can, time permitting. So again, my name is Bianca Mugyenyi. I'm here representing the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, which is an organization that challenges unjust foreign policy measures and aims to bridge the gap between the perception and the reality of Canada's policies abroad, role in the world. We also work to challenge the racism that's embedded in Canadian foreign policy. So you can find out more about us at foreignpolicy.ca. And our organization is reliant on contributions from our community to keep doing this work. So consider donating or becoming a sustainer at foreignpolicy.ca/donate. And I'll put that link in the chat as well. And so now for tonight's event, we're going to be hearing about an alliance that heavily shapes the lives of 11 million largely Black Haitians. It's an event about what may be Canada's most openly imperialistic alliance. And it's an event about a group that the dominant media in Canada has, and elsewhere, has all but ignored, and few Canadians have ever heard of. But Haitians know about it. Graffiti in Port-au-Prince targets the core group, and protesters regularly criticize the coalition. The core group includes ambassadors of US, Canada, France, Spain, Germany, Brazil, as well as representatives of the UN, the EU, and the OAS. It was officially established by a UN Security Council resolution on April 30th of 2004. And that resolution replaced the UN force created after US, Canadian, and French, replaced the UN force created after US, Canadian, and French troops invaded to overthrow the elected government with the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti, also known as MINUSTAH, which occupied the country for 15 years following that. So unofficially, the core group traces its roots to the 2003 Ottawa Initiative on Haiti meeting, which we'll hear more about shortly from Jean. And on social media, I recently noticed Madame Bookman, Justice for Haiti, recently tweeted, open quote, "The all-white core group of ambassadors, US, Canada, France, Brazil, Spain, Germany, EU, UN, OAS, in Haiti hold multiple meetings per month to discuss how to continuously tighten the stranglehold on 12 million Black Haitians. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Jean Saint-Vil, or Jeffrey Haiti. Jean Saint-Vil is an author and member of Solidarity Quebec, Haiti. He's the co-founder of Akasan and Jacques Conbit, which follow the principles popularized by Marcus Garvey. He's a featured political analyst on Canadian as well as international media. He's a Canadian civil servant, and Jean hosts and co-hosts several weekly programs and is an artist, activist immersed in the global peace and social justice movement. Jeffrey Haiti, Jean Saint-Vil lives in Ottawa Gatineau, but returns to Haiti regularly. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you, Bianca. Pone respect, Jemima. Much respect, Elle. Nice to see you again. And greetings to everyone who tune in for this important event. I also acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people, a city currently known as Ottawa Gatineau, and which is also the seat of the infamous Ottawa Initiative on Haiti, of which I'm about to speak. It's a privilege, indeed, to have the opportunity to speak about what is happening in my native land. In a brief note that I wrote to share with my colleagues on Facebook about this event, I mentioned the fact that more than 5 decades now that I have been on this planet, I've spent in this territory in Canada. And I feel like a teenager who is finding out some inconvenient truth about my parents when I find out what Canada has been doing in Haiti. And so I hope that this presentation will have some links that will permit you to dig further into the Ottawa Initiative on Haiti and why it is problematic. I have a brief presentation. I debated whether or not to have a presentation, but in reality, the purpose of the presentation is to give you some opportunities to, feel free to screenshot and look deeper into some of the material that I'm going to share with you. So, and hopefully, by using this presentation, I'm going to be able to cover a good part of the period between 2000 and 2010. And I believe that my colleague Jemima is going to focus more on the current times. But as you will see in the presentation, the white supremacist coalition that has been rendering Black lives hell on earth on that island, it did not stay in the past. And a lot of people are comfortable if you tell them about the history of white supremacist racism against Haitians, as long as you keep it to the past. When you get to the contemporary period, people feel very uneasy and unable to understand things that are quite plain from my perspective. And hopefully I will lay out some of the evidence there that Haiti is an international crime scene. And really I have 2 elements that I'm going to present here with some references at the end. The history of Haiti, it may be fascinating in many ways, but it's really about displacement of Africans from the Papal Bull of 1454 to the present day. Africans have been running scared for their lives, first from the west coast of Africa, crossing into the Americas, Brazil, North and South America, and the Caribbean. And now, as we speak, hundreds and thousands of Haitians are running scared, leaving a paradise Caribbean island to go to Chile, Brazil, crossing the Amazon River to try to make it to the United States. The question is why? Why are they running and running in the direction opposite to what their ancestors did just a few hundred years ago? And that question has a lot to do with us as Canadians. If you look at what has happened on the island since the arrival of the first Europeans in 1492, it's all about genocide. It's all about displacement of people, and it's all about white supremacy. The imposition, even the name of the territory, the criminal Europeans imagined that they could call it Hispaniola, meaning Little Spain, whereas the Arawak-speaking people who were there had already named their island Haiti. And that's why at the conclusion of the Haitian Revolution, the Africans decided to honor the first owners of the island and called it back Haiti. And when Haiti was created, clearly in the context of a racial conflict that had no confusion at the time, the liberator of Haiti, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, made sure to tell the liberated Africans that our goal here is not to continue the criminal system that was imposed on the island, but rather to fix the problem and to make sure that we create a nation where everybody can live freely. And so it's not surprising that Haiti was the first territory where racial slavery was abolished in truth. Of course, there was the earlier abolition in 1793, but in reality, the French and Napoleon Bonaparte sent troops to reinstate full-fledged slavery, as this was never their idea. The second slide here that I put about the timelines, what's really important for us to focus on is the 1990 and 2000 period, where essentially Haiti, having fought white supremacy throughout its existence from its lifetime, imposition of embargoes, what they call gumboot diplomacy. What it really means is that in a given year, the Germans show up and they demand $1 million, or they're going to blow up the Haitian National Palace. A few weeks later, the British show up and they say they'll take the island of La Tortue if they are not given $1 million. And all of these things, you can go and check for yourself how it happened throughout the existence of Haiti. And the most infamous part is the French, who collected the equivalent of $40 billion in today's money between 1825 and 1947. But the president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who demanded that the French return at least this ransom that was collected at gunpoint, suffered the same fate as all Africans who dared stand for their people. And so President Aristide issued that restitution demand the eve of the bicentennial of Haiti. And a few months later, that's when the meeting took place right here in Ottawa, called the Ottawa Initiative on Haiti, where a coalition of white cousins met and they decided to overthrow not only the president of Haiti, but the 7,000 elected officials, essentially to topple the Haitian state and put in its place blackface puppets who are still in power as we speak. And so this is not something that's new. When the Americans invaded Haiti in 1915, that was a few months after they had entered the country and stole its gold reserve, with which they started the National City Bank of New York. But what they did was to overthrow the Haitian military, and they created a new military. They call it Forces Armées d'Haïti. And, white supremacy has a different kind of humor. So all of these white guys that you see here are the generals of the Haitian army. Of course, the Yankees thought they were funny, having massacred thousands of Haitian peasants. The next move was to impose on Haitians mulatto dictatorships. So this fool here that you see here, Sir Dartignav, was asked to sign a treaty that he has not read that basically gives the Americans all powers on Haiti. So let's leave the past and get to the present. When this meeting took place, January 31st, February 1st, 2003 at Meech Lake, Minister Denis Paradis, who convened the meeting, was exposed by journalist Michel Vastel in L'Actualité, where he said that Denis Paradis presented as his a justification for organizing this brainstorming among cousins to decide, the fate of Haiti, because time is running out. It is estimated that Haiti's population could reach 20 million in 2019. It is a time bomb which must be stopped immediately. Perhaps we should spend some time to ask ourselves why 20 million Black people living in their own country represents a time bomb to Denis Paradis. Well, less than a year, at least slightly a year after this meeting of white men and women exclusively at Meech Lake, where they decided, according to the article that you can still consult on the website of L'Actualité, where they say Aristide must go, and it's not the Haitian opposition asking for it, but a coalition of countries and foreign dignitaries invited to Canada by Denis Paradis, sorry. Okay, Haiti must be put under UN tutelage, and a new police force and a new army instated. And that's where they created this idea of a core group. That is, now they're going to instate a fake Haitian government with a president who is going to be in a hierarchical relationship with the white powers who are going to take over Haiti. And here we use white in a general term, because in reality, you have Latin American countries who are going to be given jobs in that coalition of imperialists, in particular Brazil, which actually ended up leading the military force. But to understand the idea that was behind this coup is a statement by Luigi Einaudi, and that's not something people are telling me. I was there. At the Hotel Montana. And when I came back to Canada, we published a number of things, interviews in mainstream media, and they categorically refused to use this quote. When Luigi Einaudi said to, in the presence of journalist Kevin Pina, Ezeli Dantor, myself, and my wife, who was there as well in the lobby, the real problem with Haiti is that the international community is so screwed up and divided, they're actually letting the Haitians run Haiti. That's what he said. And this man is not some kind of skinhead at the street corner in Ottawa. He's the Assistant Secretary General of the OAS. And of course, they did it. They kidnapped the president and his wife at night. And this is why they did it. These are the people who were behind the coup. And what do you see in terms of a particularity of these individuals who are supposedly Haitian when you compare them with the Haitian population? Does it remind you of that other slide I showed you about the US occupation in 1915, when in fact all Haitian presidents ended up looking like the current presidents of Dominican Republic, where you have a Black population and white leaders. That's considered good. And so these guys are the richest people in Haiti. They represent exactly the same thing that those 20,000 whites who were in charge or running the colony before the revolution. And they count on their cousins in Europe and white North America to maintain their apartheid system. And they participated in the coup in 1991 against President Aristide as well, because he had increased the minimum wage to see if Haitians can move from abject poverty to poverty with dignity, as the president stated. The troops brought cholera, killed over 50,000 Haitians, contaminated over 1 million, not a cent in reparation. This slide simply shows you the difference between when it's the white supremacist groups, the core group that chooses a president. That's who they selected as Haitian president illegally. Hillary Clinton forced the director of the Electoral Council to change the results so that this crackhead fool could be named president of Haiti. Meanwhile, the president they removed and sent to exile in South Africa, in the Central African Republic, and who was rescued and taken back to Jamaica and then to South Africa, where President Thabo Mbeki and Nelson Mandela welcomed their brother Jean-Bertrand Aristide. When he returned to Haiti in 2011, that's what he's producing: doctors, lawyers, engineers, nurses, brains, as opposed to this fool who is a crackhead who embezzled millions of dollars so that Haitians are running from their own country today. You can see other images of André Apped here, another one of those white Haitians who are allied with the ambassadors of the European and white American leaders in Haiti. And before Jovenel Moïse was assassinated, he gave this large territory that covers 3 departments of Haiti to this fool André Apped, who participated in both coups in 1991 and in 2004, and who has a lot of Canadian connections through his sweatshop companies in Haiti. These last slides are simply making the point that Haitians are not fooled. We understand exactly why, when we have criminals in power, they receive all of the support of the white supremacist forces. But when we have a real president, a good president, he is kidnapped, overthrown. In the list of references that I put in there, a number of things I would encourage people to look at. One of them is Peter Hallward's book, to make the point that none of this is hidden. None of this is secret. It's published. So why is it you don't hear people talk about that in CBC, on CBC, Radio-Canada, BBC, CNN? So when you read Peter Hallward's book, you'll understand exactly how the coup was prepared. And this book by Sharin Razak, Dark Threats and White Knights, is also about the Somalia situation, but it will help you understand, because at least it helped me understand why it's the victims, the Haitians, who are actually blamed for being attacked by their oppressors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you very much for for enlightening us on this open secret, as you so aptly named it, and just for illuminating this troubling history, and your assertion that that Haiti is an international crime scene should rattle us all, and in particular, we living in Canada, who have played such a central role. So thank you so much. I look very forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. Thank you for that brilliant presentation. Up next, we have Al Jones. It's my distinct pleasure to be able to have her with us this evening. Al Jones is a poet, a journalist, a professor, and an activist living in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She was Halifax's Poet Laureate from 2013 to 2015. In 2017, she was named the 15th Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies at Mount St. Vincent University, and her book, Live from the African Resistance, published in 2014, is a collection of poems about resisting white colonialism. Welcome, Al.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm joining you from Mi'kmaq territory in Jabuktuk, Halifax. This poem is particularly for people who aren't Canadian, but Canadians can vibe along. Welcome to Canada, where you've probably heard of lumberjacks in flannel shirts and voyageurs in beaver furs. And don't you know that we say A after every word? And we've got that handsome young prime minister. They probably didn't tell you about the lack of drinking water on reserves. And there's over 2,000 missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. They say this is unceded Mi'kmaq territory, but fracking still occurs. Take a walk downtown and see the history we preserve. Now, a majority of people here in Halifax approve. And they say statues celebrating Mi'kmaq genocide shouldn't be removed. But then they say there's no racism here, so perhaps you are confused. You'd be forgiven if you didn't hear about all the Black kids suspended from our schools. Did they tell you about the colored home and all the children they abused, or the solitary confinement that we like to use on youth, and all the Black and Indigenous communities the government pollutes? And wait until I tell you about immigration detention and the people we refuse. We shackle women to their beds and we say that's just the rules. Oh, but I saw Trudeau hugging all those Syrians on the news. Did anybody take you to that Tim Hortons drive-through while they hire foreign workers and then threaten to deport them? But when you buy that double-double, that's probably not important. The UN released a report saying racism here is deplorable and we're building luxury condos instead of housing that's affordable. We had to settle with Omar Carter because we allowed him to be tortured. We won't let Chelsea Manning come across our borders while we welcome more criminals who perpetuated slaughters. But people think Canadians are just so polite and so adorable. We love to feel superior and to wave the maple leaf. We're very proud here of our shipyards and all the jobs that they've increased. We just don't mention who those warships will be killing in the Middle East, just like we don't talk about the slave ships that funded Alexander Keith. Don't worry, for a rich person in Halifax, he really was not unique. If you committed genocide in Africa, we'll honor you with a street. If you were on the side of slave owners, we probably named a university. We were the #1 suppliers of salt cod to plantations in Haiti. Our merchants petitioned Parliament against the end of slavery, and that South End money came from trading with the Confederacy. We exploit the migrant workers picking our apples and blueberries. This really is not a friendly province for workers or employees. The cops are on the sunshine list, but we can't get a rent freeze. But the poverty in this province never makes the highlight reel. Lighthouses and bagpipes are probably the only thing you see. We leave Africans crossing the border out in the snow to freeze. And please don't read the comments on Indigenous stories on CBC. We've got white supremacist groups interrupting ceremony. They shot fireworks at the water defenders protesting Alton Gas. A mass shooter drove around in a police car in a uniform and badge. We tried to pass a motion to ban the Confederate flag, but our police are more concerned about these mythical Black gangs. Did they tell you African Nova Scotians were 400 years upon this land? They promised farms and land grants, and then they stole it back. White people changed the names of their communities beside us on the map. Sidewalks and grocery stores are just a couple of things we lack, and now they're investing millions on prison construction contracts. If you come around here near Canada Day, you can attend the military tattoo. Just don't expect to learn about Canada leading Haiti's coup, or maneuvering with AFRICOM or in the Lima group, or the rape and torture of teens in Somalia by our peacekeeping troops. They'll never tell you about our mining company militias and their sexual abuse. You'll never hear it in our media. There's a whiteout in the news. The submarines come in our harbor weaponized with nukes. On the ground in Africa, we're putting down our boots. Our politicians team with corporations to go around the world and loot. And the military roam our schools, collecting new recruits. Moving on, you might want to be careful as a woman taking cabs. Unfortunately, consent laws are optional for our judges to understand. And I know women walking downtown where white men snatched off their hijabs. But we're in the land of tolerance, as every Canadian brags. If you're tired of hearing about residential schools and Cornwallis taking scalps, take a walk in the public gardens where you can relax. Oh, I forgot about the Boer War monuments to concentration camps and the murder of Nigerians commemorated on a plaque. Oh, wait a minute. Did you hear we were a promised land for Blacks? Did you drive by our arena, named for Scotiabank? Say that name in the Caribbean and you probably won't get thanked. Our money in the region has us joining imperial ranks. The police down in New Glasgow even got themselves a tank. But say colonialism in Canada and people draw a blank. Because let me tell you about our national sport. We're all fans of hypocrisy. I'm sorry, did I get that wrong? I meant to say hockey. And far be it from me to criticize Sidney Crosby, but white people here in Canada, They don't care about Black bodies. People are still in denial that this country once had slaves, and police on their patrols are sending Black men to their graves. Indigenous and Black bodies are filling up our jails. They stop us 3 times more in Halifax, but they say that that's not race. It couldn't be. That only happens down in the United States. And if you leave the city over the McKay Bridge, you might want to look out of your window and wave goodbye to Africville. And you might hear the cannon firing at noon off Citadel Hill. It's just your daily reminder of all the Mi'kmaq that they killed and the control they have today, why police control their will. And the elders in our communities are ill from the landfills, and that colonizing slave trader queen still gracing all our bills. And then you turn on US TV and they say, Canada? I heard that place is chill. If I could only move to Canada, my dreams would be fulfilled. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elle, for that rousing poem and for busting some of these pervasive myths about Canadian politeness. And thank you for making all of these connections to the violence experienced at home by BIPOC people at the hands of the police and elsewhere is 100% linked to the Lima Group, Somalia mining, our policies abroad. And so I really encourage people at home to follow Elle's work, and hopefully you'll be able to catch up with us a little bit more in the Q&A. Our next speaker this evening is Jemima Pierre. Jemima is the Haiti Americas Coordinator for the Black Alliance for Peace, an associate professor in the Departments of African American Studies and Anthropology at UCLA. She's the author of The Predicament of Blackness, Postcolonial Ghana and the Politics of Race, which is the winner of the 2014 Skinner Book Award in Africanist Anthropology. Welcome, Jemima.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. And it's very difficult to follow Elle Jones and Jean Saint-Vil in this presentation, but I'll do my best. I'd like to first acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded territory of the Tongva peoples, which is also named Los Angeles, California. And I'd like to thank Bianca for inviting me, and the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute for having me be part of this conversation, and with Jean and Elle Jones, thank you so much. So I'm going to continue on from where Jean, who covered so much, continue on from there, and then we'll hopefully, I'm looking forward to the conversation. So the day following the July 7th assassination of the illegitimate but nevertheless sitting president of Haiti, Helen Lalim, the head of the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti, or BINU, declared publicly that interim Prime Minister Claude Joseph would lead the Haitian government until elections were scheduled. She declared this on social media as well as through a press release. A few days later, the Biden administration sent a delegation to Haiti to meet with both Claude Joseph and Ariel Henry, who is a figure that Jovenel Moïse had designated as prime minister just before he was assassinated. The US delegation convinced Joseph and Henry to come to an agreement over Haiti's governance. The delegation also met with Joseph Lambert, the man chosen to succeed Moïse by the majority of the 10 officials in Haiti who actually had been elected. Yes, only 10 who had been elected. The delegation convinced him to stand down. So a week later, on July 17th, the BINU, which is the United Nations Occupying Office, and the core group together issued a statement that reversed the course and called for formation of what they call a consensual inclusive government, and directed that Prime Minister designate Ariel Henry would be leading Haiti as prime minister. And 2 days later, Claude Joseph, who had first been designated minister, announced that he would step aside, allowing Henry to assume the mantle of prime minister. The office of prime minister then published a list of cabinet appointees and announced Haiti's new government would be sworn in on July 20th. This new government is composed mostly of Haitian Tête Calais Party, the PHTK members, the political party of Michel Martelly and Moïse. Now, the US State Department, the US Embassy in Haiti, the core group, and the OAS then released similar statements applauding the formation of a new consensus Haitian government. We welcome the efforts by Haiti's political leadership to come together in choosing an interim prime minister and a unity cabinet, stated U.S. Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken. In effect, the core group in particular determined the country's replacement president or prime minister through a press release. Meanwhile, Haiti's civil society organizations, which had been meeting to find a way to resolve Haiti's political crisis since early 2021, were entirely left out of the international community's, quote unquote, international community's decision-making process. They have rejected the new government formed by foreigners and imposed on Haiti, and they have roundly criticized the actions of the quote unquote international community as a blatantly colonial move. Now, how do we explain the prominent role of the core group in constructing Haiti's political landscape? To ask such questions is to recognize that Haiti's sovereignty has been snuffed out by what I call the white rulers of the world. To understand how white rule functions in Haiti is to recognize that Haiti is and has been under foreign military and political control. The second occupation, which Haiti is currently under, following the first occupation in 1915 to 1934, this occupation, as Jean Saint-Vil told us, began in 2004, soon after the US, France, Canada-backed 2004 coup d'etat against the popularly elected President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. This coup d'etat led the establishment in June 2004 of a multinational military force under the auspices of the United Nations. Now, with changing acronyms and shifting mandates over the years, it is an occupation led and controlled by a group of white nations and white-dominated institutions: the United States, France, Canada, the United Nations, and the Organization of American States. And so the core group comes out of this, this formation, and it's composed of special representatives from the UN General Secretary General, the Organization of American States, as well as ambassadors from Brazil, Canada, France, Spain, the European Union, and the US. The core group has since appointed itself as arbiters of Haitian politics. Unelected by and unaccountable to the Haitian people, the core group is, in the words of Yves Engler, a racist colonial alliance and the imperial power ruling Haiti, but has directly run the Haitian state apparatus since especially 2010. The core group supported unpopular President Jovenel Moïse's regime, even in the face of popular protests and despite the shocking evidence of its corruption, brutality, and dictatorial tendencies. But the core group's influence predates Moïse. It was directly responsible for the installation of the PHTK party of the right-wing Duvalieriste, Michel Martelly. And Jean just described Martelly in the words that he deserves. So I wanted to just quickly talk about how Martelly came into power, because it's so important to think about how the white rulers decide what happens in Haiti. So in 2010, the Organization of American States Special Representative Ricardo Saint-Tempus detailed that the core group really led an electoral coup that brought this ruling clique in Haiti to power. And the core group really decided who the next president of Haiti would be long before the elections took place in November 2010. So in the aftermath of the January 10th earthquake, many counseled against holding national elections. Yet such elections was imposed on Haiti by the US, France, and Canada, who in turn reportedly paid $29 million in logistical support for the elections and its run in its second round. The first round was held on November 20th, 2010, but there were problems even in the run-up to that date, most egregiously the banning of the Famille Lavalas party founded by the exiled Aristide, a move that effectively denied the majority of the Haitian people representation. On the date of the election, there was such a low voter turnout and rampant irregularities that the Haitian Election Provisional Council argued that it would be impossible to determine who would advance to the second round. In fact, a study by the Center for Economic and Policy Research demonstrated that out of all registered voters, 71% did not vote. And the ultimate runoff candidates received less than 11% of the votes combined, with the president-elect Martelly receiving only 4.5% of the vote. The US, through the core group, handpicked who would make it to the second round, while Jude Celestin, The favorite of incumbent President René Préval arguably came in second place. They insisted on imposing martelly onto the Haitian people. They insisted that martelly, they changed the finals and put martelly as the runner-up in the elections. Now, it was later revealed that on the morning of November 28, 2010, the US ambassador, then Ambassador Kenneth Merton, and Special Representative of the UN and Minister Chief Edmund Mullet, who was representing the core group, Mullet convened a meeting of Haiti's white rulers. At that meeting, the core group representative tried to remove then President of Haiti, René Préval, from power and to send him into exile, then the same way that they had sent Aristide into exile. The threat to Préval was because the forerunner of the elections, Jude Celestin, they assumed would fare well. Meanwhile, the US Embassy in Port-au-Prince published a press release at 9 p.m. on the same day of the elections, dismissing the voting results of the first round. While Jude Celestin, the favorite of incumbent President René Préval, arguably came in second place, he was not the choice. And Martelly would eventually win with less than a quarter of the votes. The core group backed Martelly throughout his mandate, even after he failed to hold elections. In response to his dissolution of parliament and in January 2015, the core group expressed, quote, trust that the executive will act with responsibility and restraint, end quote. But Martelly ruled by decree for more than a year, and his thugs violently disrupted the August 2015 legislative elections. Regardless, the core group helped Martelly impose Jovenel Moïse as his successor in the elections that prompted protests and a rerun. As mass protests erupted against Moïse's corruption and austerity in July 2018, the core group continued to defend him. And now, in the wake of the assassination of Moïse, the core group is in full control of Haiti. The core group is the arbiter of colonial indirect rule of Haiti, or I would say direct rule of Haiti. Its presence in Haiti is based on a basic racist assumption that the Haitian people cannot govern themselves, that Haiti is ungovernable, that Haiti needs the paternalistic guidance of foreign powers. It does not matter that Haiti's democratic so-called failures are due to meddling and destabilization, often by the core group's very members. By effectively acting as the neo-colonial trustees of Haiti, the core group has undermined Haiti's sovereignty and autonomy while crippling Haiti's efforts at democratic self-determination. As you can see, neither neutral nor passive, the core group plays an active interventionist role in Haiti's everyday political affairs. It has worked to extend and protect foreign economic interests in Haiti, and it has consistently intervened in Haiti's sovereign political affairs without the collaboration or consent of Haiti's government, the government installed by the core group. Importantly, there's no prescribed term limit on the core group's mandate, and theoretically, it could be in place in perpetuity. Now, what has been significant after outlining this contemporary story of the core group in Haiti is the absolute inability for most people throughout the world to recognize that what is happening to Haiti is a direct result of an active and white supremacist colonial occupation. In fact, most people don't consider what is happening in Haiti or the rule of the UN BNU occupation and the core group as an occupation. Indeed, when it comes to Haiti, the so-called international community does not have limits on the actions that it takes. Legality and common sense get left out of the equation. And here, I have to point out to the fact that one of the reasons that Haiti is not considered worthy of sovereignty by many, including the UN Security Council and most other countries in the world, is because of its Blackness. Haiti represents the Blackness of Blackness, the primitive placeholder for the primordial threat to white supremacy. The dehumanizing discussions about Haiti from the UN Security Council, which keeps renewing the mandate of an occupying force, an anomaly sovereign nation, to the US government officials bemoaning the large numbers of Haitian migrants at their borders, all of this affirm this perception of Haiti's Blackness. The Blackness of Haiti, or Haiti as representing a particular kind of Blackness, terrifies the white rulers of the world. And the goal since the beginning of the 19th century is to demonstrate what has happened to those Blacks who have risen to take their independence. They seek to demonstrate that the so-called Black world, in a racist way, that is incapable. Then Haiti's failures serve as an example of the Black world of Africa and the United States to say, Haitians took independence and look where they are. Now, I'm going to end with two quotes that are almost 100 years apart, that really point to this anti-Blackness and this idea that Haitians are not able to rule themselves. And the first is by a U.S. ambassador to Haiti, by James Foley, who said this in the WikiLeaks files, where you can find all kinds of racist things said about Haiti. And in the WikiLeaks files, he said, "We are calling on core group members to put the CEP, which is the Provisional Electoral Council, and the interim government of Haiti on the spot, and to press them to focus on what is needed now, namely a significant effort to ensure a successful registration process. The underlying message is that the election is first and foremost a Haitian responsibility. That said, the reality is that successful elections, according to the current timetable, will require more effort and engagement from the international community," end quote. Now, in 1915, the former US Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson said this at the beginning of the US occupation of Haiti. He said, quote, "The experience of Haiti and Liberia show that the African races are devoid of any capacity for political organization and possess an inherent tendency to revert to savagery and to cast aside the shackles of civilization, which are irksome to their physical nature," end quote. And I will end right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jemima. Thank you, Jemima. Thank you so much. Thank you for that passionate, clear, and comprehensive, quite frankly, devastating outline of the shocking events surrounding the core group's ascent, their current power, their paternalistic role, and for the very important reminder that, you know, this is a colonial racist removal of sovereignty and an attack on the Blackness that Haiti represents. So thanks again, Jemima. That concludes our opening presentations for the evening. And we're now going to be moving on to the Q&A portion of the evening. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. There's a few that are there, so we're going to start with those first. We're having a little bit of trouble with the participant count. I'm happy to report that there are 99 of us here on this event. It's wonderful to be gathered with so many people for such a critical topic. So in terms of the Q&A, the first question that we have is someone is asking whether the panelists can talk about the Haitian Revolution's role in combating racism globally and any internal racial politics involved. So it's a pretty broad question, but I'm going to pose that to any and all of the panelists to hear some of your perspectives on that question.
Well, I mean, if I can start, I mean, I would say that when you think about Haiti, the striking element, and I think that's what Jemima put the emphasis on, is the African nature of that population. And even if you just look at how Dominican Republic is treated diplomatically, as opposed to how Haiti is treated, you see it, it just jumps at you. So the importance of the Haitian Revolution is never forgotten, because throughout that period of time, Haiti represented a mirror that refuses to lie. It's an accurate mirror. So when white supremacy has invented all kinds of fake mirrors for itself, for instance, inventing stories of abolitionists, upholding folks like Wilberforce, like Schlossler. Well, when you put it in front of the Haitian Revolution, all of these fools look for exactly what they are. Like Wilberforce, who is celebrated in Canada in 2007, our prime minister was taking Michael Jean, of all people, on a tour to celebrate Wilberforce, when in reality, the same year that this law was passed to say that it's better to abolish the trade, but to keep slavery, Wilberforce was the one advocating that slavery should not end right away. Because if you do that, you're going to ruin England, you're going to ruin our nation and whatever. This is the kind of hero white supremacy wants. And they don't choose them only within the white population. They even choose Black heroes for us. For instance, there's this fool named Pierre Toussaint, who was a slave in Haiti and ended up staying a slave in order to protect his master's wife. And the Catholic Church wants to make this fool a saint, so that current Africans who survive white supremacy can go and kneel to pray white God in front of this Black fool. So to tell you that Haiti is problematic, because as long as Haiti exists, you have to admit that no, it wasn't Victor Schloesser, it wasn't Wilberforce who ended slavery. It was Africans who defeated the army of Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, this is the only defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte's army. How come we go to university and we become history professors and that's not even part of the curriculum? That's because Haiti poses a problem not only at the political level, but also at the intellectual level. So it's a mirror that disturbs. And so it has to be crushed. It has to be crushed in the present and in the past. And unfortunately, Haitians refuse to go away.
I'll just add to that really quickly, because I do have to go in like a couple of minutes to do our prison radio show. But yeah, further on to that, when I taught at King's College here, we did Hegel. And of course, in the philosophy of history, Hegel talks about Africans have no concept of freedom, so let us pass over Africa. And he's writing this at the time of the Haitian Revolution, where Africans are rising up for freedom, right? So the literal inability of white people to ever believe that Black people can liberate ourselves, you can trace that all the way back, right? That we learned all the great revolutions and we never learn about Haiti. And if they ever tell you, they just suggest it as some kind of, they were influenced by the French Revolution, as if there was like no independent thought in Africans. And that underlies this white savior complex that is ongoing, right? So we can trace it all the way back. Of course, the ongoing punishment of Haiti for seeking their freedom, right? And being successful. The paying of reparations by Haiti to France that continues to impoverish Haiti today, when we're talking about, what is it, like 800 trillion equivalent dollars until what, 1947? And then, they'll be like, oh, Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. So we continue to live this out. And I really appreciated those comments, because I think it's also instructive for current activists. And this goes to Yuri's question about BLM as well. Some of you may have seen the recent hit piece in the Toronto Star on Desmond Cole, which was really a hit piece on radical Black activism, right? So this is the Toronto Star punishing Desmond Cole for walking away from them 4 years ago and saying, I don't want to work for you if you're not going to let me advocate for Black people. And then I choose Black people. And these people 4 years later, still being like, how do we get this Black man for walking away from us? And enlisting another Black person to do a hit piece basically against radical Black people, and saying, actually using the words that rarely in the history of Black people has anyone been so violent as like Desmond Cole, with violence being defined as reporting on things like Black capitalists making money off mining companies that kill Black people making money off the prison industrial complex, Black judges interfering with deportation cases. Like, this is what Desmond Cole is reporting on, that is phrased as violence against your own flesh and blood, like as if we didn't have Black people that walked other Black people onto slave ships, but somehow it's more violent to report on power, right? So we're still seeing these same things in action, like, how dare you free yourself? How dare you walk away from us? Like, you're going to pay for that. And what we're going to make you pay is we're actually going to enlist your own people to smear you in, like, that was like a full page spread. Like, have you ever seen that much writing on a Black person in the Toronto Star in your life? And it's like the middle page. And I just say that, obviously I'm very close friends with Desmond Cole. I organized with him. And it was just so blatant. And it's just a reminder of the punishment that will exist for you in perpetuity and in infinity if you as a Black person fight for freedom. And we've seen Haiti having that played out upon Haitian people now, like hundreds of years later. So when we want to say, like, why is Canada engage in this? Because they can never let us get free. It cannot be a possibility. It couldn't be a possibility for Hegel that Black people could liberate themselves. It wasn't a possibility for any of these white European philosophers that we study talking about freedom and democracy that could not make a place for African freedom and liberation. And it remains not the case today. And so just briefly finishing, because this is like, and then I got to go, the question about do we take up anti-war on the contemporary Black left? No, we don't. And that's part of the problem, is that we've seen our current movements increasingly be co-opted. And it's not that I dislike these people, I'm friends with people, but we have to talk about buying mansions with, $8 million of the people's money, right? That this is what continually happens to us. We have no discourse on really connecting what's happening to us to the global. We haven't been good at global solidarity at all, partly because I think since like roots, we've taken this bourgeois cultural like solidarity, like let's wear kente and have drumming, but we have literally no political solidarity at all. So when we talk about Africa, we talk about it just in these like vague cultural terms. Oh, we'll do a libation, but we don't actually talk about political solidarity with Africa, political solidarity with Haiti, political solidarity with Africans living across Latin America and the globe in the Caribbean, right? Like we don't have any of that. And it's been a huge failure of the way that obviously not identity politics is the right use it as like Blackness is illegitimate to talk about, but identity politics is embodied by Obama, where we have obviously Black people serving the role of white power. And part of that is distracting us into like debating about, do we need more Black people on Bay Street? We need more Black people on the boards of mining companies. We need more Black people deporting Black people as ministers, and not that we actually need to fight militarization. We need to fight for African sovereignty. Like we aren't doing these things. It's been a huge failure on the general left, obviously, but also on the Black left. And the last thing I'll say, and then I keep saying the last thing, but I'm just trying to get all my things in. I mean, the Anime Paul thing was a good example of that, right? That Anime Paul successfully got our liberal media to believe that the only thing that was happening there was anti-Blackness and anti-Semitism, when in fact, of course, Anime Paul leads an environmental party that is pro-war and pro-settlement in Palestine. And, we weren't allowed to have that discourse at all, right? And then when we were talking about it, it was just this very bourgeois liberal, like, oh, she's a Black woman, like Black women will be leaders of federal parties. And it's like, is that really the issue? Like what are you actually leading here? If you're pro-settlement, if you're anti-Palestinian, if you're pro-military, but somehow an environmentalist, like if we're not allowed to have any debate about like any of that. And so this is very worrisome and something that we have to be really concerned by, that we're seeing more and more in Canada, Black people now coming into these positions as ministers and party leaders and members of your university senate, and doing the same white supremacist things. And then when you critique them, you get a like huge smear page in the Star. So we have to be very, very mindful about this and what these lessons are, the lessons of freedom, the lessons of revolution. And on that note, I gotta go. So sorry, everybody, but thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Elle. And I'm sure that everyone here, oh, Elle is gone. That was wonderful. It's so wonderful to hear from Elle, and I'm glad that we got a lot of her during this Q&A period. And like I had said earlier, please do keep up with Elle's work. Find out about her books and her writing and activism. All right, we do have quite a few more questions to get to, and only about half an hour left in the Q&A, so I'm just going to go straight to them. We have a number of questions that are about sort of the same topic, which is solidarity movements. We have one, so I'm just going to read them all because they're kind of similar. Should Canada, out of the core group, be a main solidarity movement demand? One person asks. And then there's also a question about whether there's a growing Black-led anti-war, anti-imperialist movement. Elle sort of spoke to this quite a bit. And then there's another question that's kind of about allyship as well that I'll just throw in here, which is, can anyone name any consistent allies of Haitian people today or yesterday? So I'm just gonna put those together.
I do think I can start responding to some of the allies. Well, the Black left, of course, I can say the Black Alliance for Peace, which is at this point the only anti-imperialist Black-led organization that we have in the US, radical organization that really focuses on the region and uses Haiti as an entry point for the Americas, right? And so we've been very loud about, especially the core group, and I think for the longest time, no one was mentioning, not a lot of people were mentioning the core group. And so we've been really, for almost a year now, really writing about the core group and talking about the core group and bringing it up. I do think there is during one of the things that this happened, it's two things. One of the things, during when Aristide was kidnapped, put on a plane and sent back to Africa. One of the key people who, one of the key Black U.S. people was like Randall Robinson, Maxine Waters, and the actor Danny Glover. Yeah, where the Black folks who really stood up, and they're the ones that actually, if you go to Democracy Now's politics has changed quite a bit, but if you go to Democracy Now, you can still find in their archives the actual, like, I listened to this live as Aristide was like saying, I'm being kidnapped, I didn't have a phone, and so on. And it's Maxine Waters and that flew to the Central African Republic and got a conversation with the coup d'etat leader there, and was able to take Aristide and fly him back to Jamaica to see his family, right? So we had that kind of support, especially from the US Black community, which I haven't seen lately. I think some things happened. The CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, has become very neoliberal. They support the war machine. They vote for every military spending bill. And now it's really Black faces going one after another to Haiti, doing the bidding of the Biden administration and the bidding of the US imperial machine. And so that's the sad part for me. I think that there was a moment where there was this kind of solidarity from especially the Congressional Black Caucus. We don't see that now because, the politics have become so right-wing in the US that you can't talk about imperialism. And that's not just for politicians, it's for intellectuals, academics in particular. And so it's just really, it's something to think about.
Thank you, Jemima. Jean?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Jemima said is right on, and you could add to it the Canadian element. I mean, at least on the US side, when the coup just happened, not only did you have the Congressional Black Caucus, you had Danny Glover, Amy Goodman, and all of these folks who were mobilized, Randall Robinson, even PJ Patterson, the CARICOM, even the African Union condemned the coup. So you had a Black-white divide, like that was clear. You even had Nelson Mandela made some statements, praising President Mbeki for welcoming Jean-Bertrand Aristide in South Africa. Now, on the Canadian side, however, you had the naming of Michael Jean in 2005, timed to subdue the work of the Canada Haiti Action Network, the group of activists who were putting out some inconvenient truth about what's happening in Canada. And Michael Jean having taken up the job of Secretary General of the Francophonie, lived up to the name of the thing, being very phony about all of her statements, where basically she played just the job that white supremacy gave her, making statements against leaders who were trying to make sure that the resources of Africa were used for the African people. And in Haiti, all of the crimes that were happening under the UN, like when the UN killed over 50,000 Haitians, none of these so-called Haitian intellectuals, whether it is Danny Laferrière or Michael Jean, said a thing. Even Haitian elected officials in Montreal, who are very highly placed in the liberal government. Instead, they use them when Haitians are running from the nightmare that the white supremacist forces created in Haiti. They're running for their lives, and they found refuge in the stadium here in Montreal. What did they do? They called this boy, what's his name, who's an MP. The prime minister fetched him to go to New York to tell Haitians, don't come to Canada. I mean, he himself came here as a refugee. So the betrayal of Black revolution by Black fools need to be fought. and we cannot be complacent with these traitors. Yeah, Emmanuel Djibout is the name of this fool.
Thank you, Jean. So we have a couple more questions. Henry is asking, is there a role for CARICOM and the African Union in saving Haiti from the imperialists and white supremacists?
Well, I got to say, what's happened on the African continent is similar to what's happened in the Caribbean in terms of displacing all the radical leaders, either through assassination or coup d'etats, and replacing them with all these neoliberal, figureheads that do the bidding of US and Western imperialism. And so the African Union is the biggest disappointment to me in the sense of thinking, for example, they gave Israel observer status, just recently. And you have to think about how the African Union has been very quiet around Haiti. In fact, what's one of the key things about the occupation in Haiti was the fact that it was white initiated, but really carried out by a multinational, multiracial group of people. So you had soldiers from most of the African continents, soldiers from all over the Caribbean who were part of MINUSTA. And so this was a multinational, multiracial occupation. So what does that tell us about the where we are in the world, where people see Haiti in that way, that it needed like a Chapter 7 peacekeeping declaration as opposed to Chapter 6. Chapter 7 allows them to use force, which they did use. And I think I wanted to point out what Jean said about cholera. Imagine if there was a bombing of a country that killed 50,000 people, right? That would be like the spectacular violence, right? And that everybody would be outraged. Cholera killed about the same amount of people, and everyone went about their business as if nothing happened. The UN said that they weren't responsible, and even after 6 years, they were like, well, it's not receivable. We don't have to, accept the charge, right? And so part of that is we have to understand, well, what is going on what is it about Haiti, and what is it about these new leaders, these new Black and brown and non-white leaders that are taking up the mantle of white supremacy and doing the work for that. And I think CARICOM falls under the same thing because, you have PJ Patterson, who was very supportive of Aristide and was one of the first, he was chair of CARICOM during the coup d'etat in 2004 and released a statement, on March 1st, denouncing the coup and demanding that Aristide be brought back. And then, when they thought about giving Aristide asylum, Condoleezza Rice threatened the region with sanctions and so on and so forth. But CARICOM would not do that now. In fact, they participate now in some of the core group meetings. It's as if it's a given that Haitians must be, or Haiti must be under white rule, and even Black countries and so-called Black leaders agree to that. And that to me is the most disturbing part of the current occupation.
Bianca, I wanted to address one of the other questions that is linked to that same issue, because someone asked, should Canada out of the core group be a rallying call? I'd say yes, but we need to be careful, because one of the strategies that they've used, and Jemima just talked about how they co-opted Black people. So they use blackface traitors to do their bidding. Colin Powell, we just saw how they all falling all over themselves when this fool died the other day, right? Because he served them. So we cannot use the word core group, because I can predict they're going to change its name very soon, because that's one of the strategies that they've been using all along. So the MINUSTA having caused the 50,000 Haitian deaths, so now they don't call it MINUSTA anymore. There's something called BINU. So they're trying to erase the trails. And what you see is a pattern. The same strategy that the white fools use to try to erase their trace is the same that their stooges in Haiti also use. So now PHTK, the party that Michel Martelly and Jovenel Moïse, all of these criminals had used, now has been so dirtied that Martelly claims that he has a new party. And people are saying, whoa, it's not that easy, man. You cannot commit all of these crimes under this name, and then all of a sudden you change its name. and as if you're going to renew yourself. So it's not a question of the core group. We need to absolutely demand that white supremacist racism be removed from Canadian foreign policy, whether as it is applied to Haiti, Venezuela, because you will see the same pattern in Venezuela. And with regards to the Caribbean solidarity, Ralph Gonsalves, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadine, remained constant. This man is a giant in the Caribbean. And I agree with you, Jemima, that in the Caribbean, there's been so many betrayals, but I think it's a cyclical thing. I'm hoping that some of the leadership that's going up out of Barbados now is going to help turn the tide. But you cannot ask the imperialists to change. They're going to continue to co-opt, and it's our responsibility to try to expose them. But the signs are clear. If you look at, I think that's one point that is important to make here, because it's linked to some of the questions. All of the leaders that the core group has propped up in Haiti for the past 20 years, they all have clear criminal records, not stuff that is in contention. If you take Ariel Henry and Claude Joseph, they are both accused of being involved in the assassination of Jovenel Moïse, that other fool. Jovenel Moïse and Michel Martelly are prime suspect in the disappearance of their close friend, Evanx Daniel, a drug dealer who was in the South. Like, these are things that all Haitians are aware of. And so they handpicked Martelly to embezzle those $4.2 billion of Petro-Caribbean funds. And one of the things that Haitians are very angry about is that we have a set of criminals. The Haitian law is there. We would like to put these fools to trial and put them in jail. And here are the friends of Haiti, Canada, the United States, who are protecting the criminals. That's a story that needs to make it to the mainstream media. And I think we need to clarify that. For instance, the wife of Jovenel Moïse, okay? Her name is directly linked with the assassination of the attorney of Port-au-Prince, Maître Montferrier Dorval. And it's not something that's being said. Her late husband, Jovenel Moïse himself, was on national television saying that 2 minutes after the assassination of Dorval, who lived in the same street as they, Martin Moïse was showing the video to him. He's the one who said that. And there are people who are asking, could this be one of the reasons Jovenel Moïse was actually killed? Because it's still unclear how criminals who are trained as mercenaries enter the house. They have a wife and a husband, and they kill the husband. They have enough time to mutilate the body of the husband, but the wife, who receives 8 bullets, survives. Like, was she shot with slingshots or with the same guns that killed Jovenel Moïse? This doesn't make any sense. And of course, now she's in the custody of the United States. That means the CIA is conducting the whole thing. And that's why Haitians have no hope of finding out how this assassination happened. But the important thing is, all of the folks who are in power today are from the same party of the so-called killed president. That doesn't make any sense. If anybody was conducting a coup in Haiti, they would have taken power, okay? So that means it's the same party that eliminated Jovenel Moïse because he became a liability rather than an asset for them.
Thank you, Jean. This is very related to a question actually that was asked about whether any of you would want to venture a theory as to who assassinated Moïse and why. And then their follow-up, is this an indication that things are not well in Haiti at the very highest level, including the core group? I don't know if you have anything to add to this, Jemima.
Well, I think there was an internal fight within the PHTK, which we've seen emerge, right? The Moise wing versus the Martelly wing. And Martelly was using Moise so that he could come back, like he was a placeholder, right? In terms of what was going on within the elite. And I think the US very much knows what went on. Nothing happens in Haiti without the US government and the core group people knowing. And so I think there's some internal struggle going on between the PHTK and the oligarchy, because we'll never know who funded this. You know, this took millions of dollars. So it's just really interesting to think about that, and to know that, you know, all these people who are supposedly running Haiti are the ones behind the assassination. But part of the thing about the assassination to me is how blatant it was, and how and the view of Haiti that you can go and get some Colombian mercenaries, by the way, who are being sold everywhere, supposed to go commit assassinations, but to be so blatant and to say, okay, we can just assassinate him and get away with it, right? and people think, oh, it's just these Haitians, you know, they're all killing each other again, and so on. And so it's important to think about the role of the so-called international community in creating chaos, because the chaos is the point, right? The chaos and the death is the point. At the same time, I wanted to shift just a little bit and talk about, and you know, running out of time, is there is a tendency for us to exceptionalize Haiti so much, and that itself is an anti-Blackness, right? We exceptionalize the experience in Haiti that we can't find parallels to the treatment, or we can't read what's happening to Haiti and see them coming for the other countries, right? So all the strategies from 2004 that the international community put in place for Haiti, they're trying to do now. They tried in Venezuela, they're trying it now in Nicaragua. In fact, today, you know, like right after Aristide won in 2001, the Washington Post had this headline that was like, hope and hatred, Aristide, you know, with the new Aristide leadership or something like that. And we can see the machinations. So Claude Joseph, who was like handpicked prime minister, was part of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is this crazily named funding agency of the US to create activists, right? To do neoliberal activists against government. So Claude Joseph was one of the student leaders against Aristide in 2000, right? Funded by the NED. A lot of these activists are funded now by the NEDs. If you think about what's going on in Cuba, right? In terms of who's funding, you know, certain kinds of protests against, you know, certain states. And so when we exceptionalize Haiti so much, we don't realize that these same machinations that worked in Haiti, they're trying everywhere else. And so we can see what happened to Haiti as what could potentially happen to Nicaragua, what could potentially happen to Venezuela, and even Cuba, right? And so there is a sense to understand anti-Blackness, but to also understand white supremacy, because it is against all these non-white nations who got themselves out from colonization, and how it is that these white nations are really trying to like extend white supremacy globally, even as it's falling apart, right? We see the US empire is crumbling, but it's not going to go without a fight. It's going to wreak havoc. And Haitians are bearing the brunt of that, but others are coming.
Thank you so much, Jemima. And there's a question about, you know, this idea of exceptionalism, actually, where somebody asks whether the panelists see Canada's support for you know, for sort of Nazis in the Ukraine, the destruction of Libya, attacks on Venezuela, and Haiti is part of, you know, a concerted strengthening of overtly racist, you know, official policy. What are your thoughts?
No, I think that's exactly the point. And, you know, when I was looking at Shireen Razak's book, the word that really struck at me is when she said the Somalia affair, peacekeeping, and the new imperialism. Of course, Somalia, that was a few decades before Haiti. And if you put that with the quote from Nelson Mandela, who said, we now live in a world where international bodies are mobilized by so-called democracies to the detriment of the poorest people of the world. That's exactly what's happening. So in Haiti, illegally, they use the United Nations Chapter 7, where there is no war. There was no peace treaty in Haiti, but they used it, and now they're applying it in other places. Just like they already used it in Somalia, they used it in the Congo when they killed Patrice Lumumba, etc. So I agree, it's not exceptional. It's something that we can link what's happening in Venezuela with it, and Libya, and in other places. I think also there was a question with regards to allies, and that is connected, because what's happening in all of these spheres are happening with our tax money. It's happening with our faces. Sometimes they use us. And Jemima made the point that now that the white supremacist forces are very suspicious, in Haiti, we say, "Yo suspect un coup chien qui pète dans l'église." I'm not going to translate that. Okay? So now they're sending Black leaders from the United States in Haiti. But that's not new. I mean, they even use Frederick Douglass. They tried to use Frederick Douglass to steal some of the territory in Haiti. Okay, so that means we need to be very alert, and we cannot be cowardly in exposing the facts, because the truth is on our side. And so there are people here in Canada who didn't know what was going on in Haiti. Through the work of the Canada-Haiti Action Network, they got involved. And you have a motion in front of Parliament asking the Canadian government to release the minutes of the Ottawa Initiative on Haiti. These are actions taken by Canadian grandmothers, people who are not seen as woke radicals, but people who do not accept that white supremacy taints the foreign policy of their nation. And so allies mean people who go beyond the facile idea that, okay, if only we could increase foreign aid, and bring it to 0.7 or whatever foolish number we were using all of these years. The reason why is, if you look at this publication, Canada Cedar's Key Role in Haiti's Coup d'etat, and it speaks about how our tax money was used to mobilize NGOs which claim to be helping Haiti. In reality, they are the ones who are mobilized to conduct coup d'etat in Haiti, in Venezuela, in Cuba, in all kinds of other places where imperialism is active. So what do allies do? What Patrick Elie said, and you will see it in Hélène Bruyère's film, Haiti Betrayed, where he said it again and again. Be a citizen of your own country. He doesn't ask you to send money to Haiti. Don't send missionaries. We don't need Jesus anymore. Jesus has done enough. Now we need Dessalines, and we need John Brown. John Brown was this abolitionist, true abolitionist in the United States. When fake abolitionists were mobilizing for an extra hour of rest for the slaves, John Brown himself took up arms and fought against the white supremacist government of the United States. And when he was killed, Haiti decreed 3 days of rest and collected $20,000 to send to his widow in the United States. So if you want to be an ally to Haiti, you have to commit class and race suicide. That's the minimum requirement. Otherwise, don't do anything. I mean, first, doing no harm would be a great thing. You don't need to go and save Haiti, but if you can make sure that your tax dollars do not go and kill more Haitians, that would go a long way. The rest we could take care of ourselves.
Oh, do no harm. It's a really important principle. I think it's much overlooked within the context of we must save those who can't save themselves. But certainly makes sense to take the boot off of someone's neck before offering up support and help. So we only have a few more minutes left. We have a lot of great questions that we never got to. I think I'm going to very briefly ask our panelists to comment a little bit more on some of the Canadian aspects before we leave. Jemima, could you briefly let folks at home know what the role of the RCMP was in the oppression of Haiti's population?
It's Jemima, but
okay, my bad. My
okay.
bad.
It's okay. It's Jemima. It's French. So think about it as French, but yeah. So I think Jean might know more than me. All I remember is being in northern Haiti and seeing the Canadian mounted police everywhere. And that's really fascinating. But what we have to remember is when the coup d'etat happened in 2004, on the night that Aristide was put on a plane, there were already 2,000 US soldiers on the ground in Haiti. And then the next day, hundreds of Canadian soldiers showed up. Canadian and French soldiers showed up. They were on the ground. So this was already planned, right? And so Canada was really, you know, we call them in the US here, we call Canada the little brother imperialist. But Canada was part and parcel of it. And everybody, you know, L. Jones is right. Everybody pretends that Canada is a nice place and they don't participate. But I do remember them being everywhere. And I think Jean can speak more to that, but they were part of that initial, destabilizing mission that went before the UN, sanctioned this coup d'etat, but they were there. Canadian soldiers were there from March 1st up until June 1st, with the US military.
Yeah, and I think, of course, Eve Engler's book and Anthony Fenton, Canada in Haiti, Waging War Against the Poor Majority, talks brilliantly about that. And in Hélène Brier's film, you will see that Canadian soldiers were at the airport. Special forces were mobilized, etc. But it's more than that, right? Because they were using Canadian taxpayers' money to corrupt young people, people in the universities, creating falsehood about the majority party, and that continued after the coup. You had people like Denis Paradis and Denis Coderre who went on, like Denis Coderre. This fool is so, I mean, he even went on the air saying that he knows two people who should replace Aristide at the head of his party. I mean, can you imagine a Haitian living in Canada, or actually a Haitian diplomat saying, who should be at the head of Canadian Liberal Party or the NDP? Like, that's what Denis Coderre did, because their plan was to dismantle Lavalas. And this other fool even claimed that Aristide, while he was in exile in South Africa, was influencing what's happening in Haiti. He was sending messages, like subliminal messages, like, how does this guy have this power across the ocean? So it was not normal thinking that guided the Canadian policy. Denis Paradis said it when he was pressured. He said that they had strong rumors that said that Aristide embezzled funds. Strong rumors. So, rumors, that's not the problem. If it needs to be doubly strong. It's like, when do you make policy on rumors? Okay, so this is, and the former Canadian ambassador to Haiti, Claude Boucher, who said he hopes that Aristide disappears, okay, and never comes back. A diplomat. Like, how can you say something like that? And that means also that they weren't concerned about the truth, because it was a hope. Okay, and all of these years, they didn't find any evidence that Aristide had stolen the millions of dollars, as if they ever really cared about people stealing money. Like Duvalier stole billions of dollars and spent all of it in the French economy. Okay, the fool never learned anything. He returned to Haiti as stupid as he left in 1986. Now you have a scholar married to a lawyer, because I think that's important. In a country like Haiti, one of the questions people always ask, where are the good leaders? Well, Haiti always had good leaders. We had one, President Salomon, who took the Haitian economy from a state where you needed 1,000 Haitian good to $1 US, okay? And he made enough changes to the Haitian finances that you needed $1 to one Haitian dollar. And what happened under Salomon in the 1873 and the 1800s? Well, almost every year, Haiti was attacked by gunboat diplomacy. When it wasn't the British, it was the Spanish, and they were ransoming the country. And this is the same thing that's happening today. You have some leaders in the civil society who are working with Famille Avalas, the party of Aristide, and that's their crime, because the unstated reality is that they want everybody to stay away from Aristide. And there's a lot of cowards in the Haitian elite who accepted that edict to stay away from Aristide. Now, this is the man who is building a university. I work in the university world in Canada. I know how precious a university apparatus is. I know how much investment you need to put in there. So you mean to tell me the man who is training doctors, lawyers, engineers is bad for Haiti? Meanwhile, you put all your diplomatic weight, all your money, all your violence to support criminals, and then you call yourself a friend of Haiti. You see, people make a big deal out of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau having used blackface in a costume so many years ago. And somehow we don't get worked up over the fact that we are using our diplomacy, all the weight of our country, to put blackface presidents in Haiti, having removed their legitimate president. I mean, to me, this means we are so superficial, and that means us in the Black community, because I haven't seen people in the community in Canada saying that, you know, this is a crime. Okay, we need to stand up, and you know, Jemima, sorry, mentioned Trans-Africa Forum, you know, and that's what we've been advocating for in Canada all of these years, that we need to mobilize people here so that we stop, you know, getting worked up over the fact that some professor used the N-word in a university as if this is a scandal. That's not, I'm not saying that we should encourage them to do it, but what I'm saying is they are committing much graver crimes against our people in Haiti, in Mali, in the Congo, everywhere on the planet. And then we're sitting here like fools, you know, worrying about, you know, street side skinheads. The street side skinheads are not our problem. Our problem is mainstream racism, and mainstream racism is happening in the government apparatus with our money and with our participation at times. And that's what we need to organize ourselves so that we have a Black consciousness in Canada that is not superficial, and that needs to be connected with the anti-racism that our brothers and sisters in the First Nations communities are fighting for. And we need real allies. That is more John Browns, okay? More John Browns. That's what we need. People who can commit race and class suicide to become citizens of the planet for real. And in the Canada Haiti Action Network and in Solidarité Québec Haiti, we did find these people do exist. There are beautiful people in this country, and we are asking them to let their beauty shine to become citizens of their own country.
Oh, thank you, Jean. Jemima, do you have any last comments before we outro today?
I think Jean did an amazing job summing up all the points that, you know, needed to be said, and I can't really add to that. I think it was great.
Okay, I think that's
so polite, not wanting to tell the guy he spoke too much, as if he's not even aware that he did.
I think that was a beautiful note on which to end. It was bang on, as someone from the audience just mentioned. What a beautiful, lively discussion. We do need a full decolonization movement, as was called for tonight. We do need real international Black solidarity. We need to get serious about the crimes being committed against Black people all around the world. So thank you, Jean. Thank you, Jemima. Thank you to Elle, who's no longer here. It's been an extraordinary evening. It's been informative, powerful, timely, and I've learned a lot, and I'm certain that people at home have learned a lot too. So let's continue having these discussions. I have a few announcements. If you like events like these, please do consider donating to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. That's foreignpolicy.ca/donate. We have a couple of events coming up on November 17. We're proud to present the Canada-China Focus's inaugural event, Beyond Sinophobia and Anti-Asian Racism in Canada-China Relations. This is featuring Senator Yuen Pao, Dr. Xiaobe, and Dr. Timothy Stanley. And Canada-China Focus is a new group. It's a new pan-Canadian anti-racist project that aims to promote critical conversation and policy initiatives on Canada-China relations. It's a project of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and the University of Victoria's Centre for Global Studies. So please do find out more about Canada-China Focus. Also in other news, the No Fighter Jet Coalition that we are part of is launching a day of action on November 22nd to oppose the federal government's plan to buy 88 new fighter jets for $77 billion. So you can find out about how to get involved with that at nofighterjets.ca. So thanks again to our co-sponsor, Common Frontiers, and to our media sponsor, Canadian Dimension. It's been a great event. I cannot overemphasize. Thank you to our incredible panelists, Jean, Elle, Jemima. That's it for our program today.
Thank you so much for having me. That's so wonderful.
Peace. Good night, everyone.